Welcome to the Coptimizer Podcast, a platform dedicated to uncuffing your true potential in public safety. We're here to provide you with valuable tips and insights that will help you optimize your life and career. I'm retired Chief Patrick Flannelly, and I'm honored to be your guide and coach on this journey. Here, I'll share the latest insights and strategies to help you survive and thrive in the demanding world of public safety. Our noble duty is to protect and serve. We embody the role of peacemakers in our communities. However, this profession's immense physical and mental demands come with a price. If we fail to take a proactive approach for our well-being and lead ourselves first, then the stress from the job can and will lead to poor health outcomes. We have all seen it play out. Not only does this impact our professional and personal lives, but it also affects our ability to fulfill this sacred duty. Like many of you, my journey has been filled with tremendous challenges, with highs and lows. However, through creativity, experience, and a positive attitude, I successfully managed over 30 years in law enforcement, emerging healthy and happy. Now, I am driven to share what I've learned to show you that the path is not all doom and gloom. There is hope and a profound purpose in serving your community, and I'm here to show you that it does not have to come at the cost of your health and well-being. Join us as we explore cutting-edge research, interview top experts, and share inspiring stories of transformation. Whether on duty or off, it's time to optimize your potential and live your best life. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. This is the Coptimizer Podcast. Greetings all. Welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer Podcast. And like every week, I keep saying this over and over again. I'm like a broken record, but I've got another fantastic guest. Today is no exception. We have John Norris. He is a retired lieutenant from the California Fish and Wildlife. He's a game warden, and he's an author. He's a prolific podcaster. So he's been around, and he's gonna drop a little bit of education on us today about marijuana legalization. And so we're gonna just kind of have a big, broad discussion about these topics. We're here in Indiana. The Coptimizer is. We're one of the few states left that has not had any form of legalized marijuana. So no medicinal or a recreational marijuana here, but we know it's coming. And that's kind of what was the impetus for me having this discussion. Got connected with John through a mutual friend, Kathleen Diaz. So thank you, Kathleen. I really appreciate it. Welcome to the show, John. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Patrick, great to be here, brother. And like you said, big thanks to Kathleen, a mutual friend of ours that's out there pushing the message and educating as much as possible. And we finally connected courtesy of her. So great to be here today. And I see some green tone to your backdrop with that awesome American flag and thin blue line. I gotta say, man, I'm feeling the love. It looks really, really bitchin' back there, man, that green. What's up with that?
So just in your honor, I was looking at the book and I'm like, all right, this is why I put LED lights back there in the first place. I'm going to switch it up. So for those that aren't looking, it's almost a perfect match. This is John's book, Hidden War, second edition. And yeah, I normally have blue on back there for the Coptimizer theme, but I was like, you know what? We've got the green theme. You've got your the thin green line, and oftentimes, which can be, also used by those in the emergency medical services. If you don't mind, can you just take a couple minutes and introduce yourself to our guest and I guess for those of us our listeners, I guess it's just such a unique thing that you've done, and I just can't wait to let people know about it for those that haven't heard you before. So,
Yeah, for sure. My name's John Norris. I'm a retired lieutenant, like you said, with Fish and Wildlife. Was a game warden for just under 30 years here in the Golden State of California, born and raised in the Silicon Valley. You don't really think of a lot of wildlife and waterways, and pristineness in the Silicon Valley, but ironically, California's got a lot of resources, and all those foothills and parks and ranches I grew up on, just literally in the foothills all around the Silicon Valley, are rich in that. Never imagined that I would go from being a traditional game warden, stopping poaching, stopping people taking over limits, environmental crime, stream alteration, educating kids on hunter education certification, all the cool things we still do and love to do. Never imagined I'd be chasing down, armed Mexican cartel growers in our forest, literally in the Silicon Valley foothills, and later throughout the rest of the state. And we learned this problem all over the country, which we're going to talk about today, and then forming up a special operations unit to fight that problem specifically because of the officer involved shootings we had had, the attacks on our canines, and just the violence in our forests on American soil, which just does not add up to think that this is happening on American soil, Patrick. And so the last 15 years, approximately, of my career was spent in the special operations world. And I know you have extensive background running special operations team in your department and your supervision as a chief there. Kind of an unorthodox journey for game wardens, but a very progressive one I was very blessed and lucky to be part of. A team that's still going strong in California. Cannabis is a huge environmental issue. It just is, and it impacts the environment extensively, especially water. And now game wardens not only are involved, but they have to be involved. And that's how we're here today. 7 years from
yeah.
retirement and still seeing the problem and speaking and teaching all over the country and podcasting. And great to be on your show today and finally be connected, because I know you're dealing with that same problem in your neck of the woods, and hopefully not having the pitfalls California experienced happen in Indiana, like they seem to be happening in so many states that regulate and see dollar signs,
Yeah.
to put it mildly.
That almighty dollar. It's such a powerful, enticing thing.
It
And
really is. It's crazy. Yeah.
well, and I don't know. Marijuana seems like such an innocent, harmless, innocuous thing. And the comparison is generally made to alcohol. Well, alcohol is legal and it causes more social ills than marijuana. So the argument tends to be we should also legalize marijuana. Plus, there are some medicinal benefits that have
Hmm.
been researched, and some of them, seem to be fairly legitimate. Others may
Right.
be a little bit questionable, just in terms of people trying to push a narrative and make the change. But I think even just for today's purposes, I think we might as well just resolve ourselves to the fact that it's going to be legal in all 50 states at some point. The federal
Agreed.
government is most likely just going to take over and set the regulation. But we'll get to that at the end and maybe why that's important. But
Right.
yeah, like you mentioned, it most people have no idea about the cartel's involvement in these illicit marijuana grow operations. They think popular culture, they think cocaine, they think the cocaine trafficking networks coming up from Mexico. Maybe the more sophisticated listener might think, well, yeah, there's also methamphetamine.
Right.
Um, well, it's all of that. It's anything that they can profit from and they can take advantage of, they're going to. And we're just not talking about like back, some backwoods, Mexicans that are just trying to make a buck. We're talking about billion-dollar operations from the low level all the way up to um, we're talking just Fortune 500 level business operations. And so, maybe that's been your experience as well, but those are things that we've seen in our small Midwestern town here since the late 90s. From cocaine to marijuana to methamphetamine to heroin and then back again. So with those thoughts in mind about this sophistication of the cartels, has that been your experience? I think California, you guys are at the epicenter here, so maybe take a little bit, a couple minutes to chat about like the evolution and what you saw from a California perspective.
Yeah, Patrick, you kind of hit it on the head. This is not, a couple of Humboldt hippies, going out to grow 50 to a couple hundred plants to maybe sell on the black market and make some, underground money and do what we traditionally think of marijuana consumption and distributors and dealers being. This is completely the opposite of that. This is transnational criminal organizations at the highest level of organization, the highest level of violence, making not millions, but billions with a B, billions of black market cash dollars all over the country. And they're involved in cannabis. In fact, they started the really dominating the black market in cannabis all over the country, grown primarily on the West Coast, especially in a state like my old state of California, where we're one of only 6 true Mediterranean climates on the globe. So we can grow fantastic cannabis, right? Just like we grow great wine. You hear about the Napa Valley wine that comes
Oh,
out,
I've been there. I love
right? And it's good stuff.
Yes.
So we can literally grow in the outdoors outside of a harsh winter between February and December, not to mention the indoor stuff that's going on. So the cartels targeted this like in the early 90s. They've literally been embedded in our national forest as early as late 80s, early 90s when I was a pup game warden just coming out of the academy. I didn't know the depth then. I was hardly aware. But fast forward to 2004, 2005, and we're seeing this stuff in the Silicon Valley. I talk about it in my first book, War in the Woods, and I reference this initial encounter to finding this first clandestine cartel grow site in Hidden War as well, the latest book that you've got. Um, that water is dried up in a creek, and this is a creek that I literally grew up in the state park above this creek, learning to backpack, learning to just love our wildlands, waterways, and wildlife. The reason I went from an engineering and an ROTC major to go into the Army and look at a special forces billet and an engineering degree instead, and directly met a game warden on that hike in the middle of college, and it changed my life. Well, I didn't even know what a game warden was, and I went, okay, I'm doing the wrong job. That's what I want to protect. I grew up hunting and fishing. Granddad, dad, career serviceman in the Army, Navy, grew up hunting and fishing, loving conservation. So I was hunting waterfowl with my dad at 9 years old. I was, looking at those early morning sunrises and seeing those ducks fly and being taught how sensitive the animals are that we're going to harvest to eat, that we're part of the solution to keep those animals out there. But there's a lot of abuse and a lot of things that can take those wildlife resources. Did I think then that when I grew up, 40 plus years later, that it was going to be the cartels, these transnational criminal organizations out of Mexico, embedded in America, doing the biggest crimes against the environment? I would have said you were smoking that crazy stuff the hippies were growing back in the day, but they were
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
so that's exactly what we're dealing with, brother. And what we got to understand, and my friends in DEA have said it best, and I'm talking about Stephen Murphy with his Game of Crimes podcast and his time doing all this work from the DEA standpoint on international narcotics, dealing a little bit with weed. He didn't have an idea of the environmental impacts until we talked on his podcast a year or so ago. And since Steve and I have become good friends, he's like, man, this affects everybody. And he mentioned he had a term
Does.
called polycriminality. Polycriminality. We got to look at the cartels as not the weed cartel, not the fentanyl cartel, not the human and child sex trafficking cartel. They're polycriminal. So the same Sinaloa groups and other factions of different cartels that are growing this weed in, say, the Golden Triangle up in Northern California, or in my foothills, or in Southern California, or in Oklahoma, Michigan, Maine, now out in your neck of the woods, especially in the Midwest, starting to pop up.
Yeah.
They're just one subcontracting group of the same organization that's running dirty fentanyl labs in Mexico and trafficking that stuff all throughout the country, right? And what do we know about fentanyl? The latest, fairly recent figure I've been told is 74,000 Americans approximately die to fentanyl overdoses from these dirty fentanyl pills. Dude, that's 200 Americans a day. So we're talking here for the next hour or so. We're going to lose what? 20, 30 Americans in a blank.
Yes.
And you think of the Vietnam War, that we lost 54,000 Americans, or 55,000, give or take, over a 10, 12-year combat, duration over in Southeast Asia. And fentanyl's killing more than that in a year from these cartels. I mean, that is just how that can happen in America is infuriating and it's heartbreaking. And I think when the American public, when we all realize that that's the same group with the weed, and now you got child sex, human trafficking, and thankfully the movie like Sound of Freedom brought that into the limelight so people could really see the
Yeah.
evilness of these sexual predators on these children and how easy it is to abduct these kids. And we have those groups in America looking for our children to put into circulation for very evil things and make a ton of money doing it. And they make a ton of money doing it. So if you're not a weed consumer and you're not really knowledgeable about marijuana or cannabis, or you're not worried that you're near a dispensary or a state that's regulated, you're still affected by these groups. And you said it best, brother. We are going to have regulated cannabis in every state in the union at some point. And what we're definitely having right now is the biggest black market we've seen nationally in all the states where there is no regulation. And unfortunately, in states that regulated poorly, like the home state of California, that I think could have been an example for the nation, being the weed state of the world, we did it completely wrong. We could have done it in ways we suggested when we were lobbying and presenting to these legislative groups when our team was forming up. But looking at dollar signs, our legislators decided to go for money, and they didn't really look at after effect of how that law is written. I know we'll dive in deeper,
Yeah.
but that's something we want the states to realize. If we're going to regulate, regulate right. And I know you know from listening and reading Hidden War that we have a group of very environmentally conscious growers that were black market, outlaws up until we regulated with Prop 64 in 2016. And they wanted to come out into the light. They were willing to pay taxes and put a lot of money into permits and inspections. And they just wanted to do it right because they were stewards of the environment, like we as conservationists are. You're a hunter, I'm a hunter. We love our wildlife
Yep.
resources. And now we've seen so much red tape and so much money that these growers have to put in, they can't survive. And the black market and the cartels now have absolutely exploited a regulation state like California. And these good growers that we want doing it correctly, if we're going to do it at all, are leaving the industry as cartels and the evilness and the black market money continues to grow as they take it over.
Yeah. I want to touch on that for just a couple minutes because when we were on our introductory call, just giving you a little bit of my background. I worked on a narcotics task force for
Yeah.
years, and
Yeah.
we were part of an FBI Safe Trees task force. So we worked, enterprise cases. We worked cases with the cartels that went all the way back to, all the way down to Mexico. And that's nothing new. I mean, those cases are happening every day all over the country with
Yeah.
origins in small town Midwest Indiana to Chicago, Indianapolis, to all your major metropolitan areas. And the reason the reason we're there is because there's money to be made. And there's when you think about the operations writ large, so we had an issue with methamphetamine in the late 90s. We were getting these red phosphorus labs and different types of labs where manufacturers were going out. They were, they were buying all the Sudafed up. So
Right.
everyone's probably even forgot why you can't buy Sudafed off the shelf anymore, right?
Right.
Yeah, because all the Smurfs were running around buying all the
Yeah.
Sudafed
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
trading it
Yeah.
for meth. And speaking of environmental catastrophes, people are creating these meth labs that just all kinds of nasty chemicals. And so now you have somebody that looks at this and says, "Hey, you know what? People, drug users in America really like this meth." Just like we provided with crack cocaine and cocaine, the cartel said, "Well, let's give them some high quality meth."
Yep.
Um, and so they did us one favor in that they took all of the production and did it in Mexico, and a large part thanks to the Chinese for getting all of the chemicals to produce it. But
Yeah.
so the meth lab started to go away, the one pot lab started to go away. So we were doing hundreds of these lab cleanups a year to it just disappeared. But then we had all this like high quality Mexican ice that's coming, into
Mhm.
the Midwest and to all over. Why? Because the cartels are exploiting an opportunity, just
Absolutely.
like they're doing now with heroin and with fentanyl. but marijuana kind of gets lost in the discussion because everybody kind of thinks like, well, it's just weed. It's just weed. So what I want to, so it's 2014. I'm at a state and local leaders course at Harvard, and I get into this conversation with, uh, there was a representative from Colorado that was there. They were new into their legalization. They were cash flush at the state
Yep.
level. And so we just got into this. I got into an interesting conversation with him. And so he was really talking about, extolling all the benefits of legalization, how they were going to tax and how they were going to regulate and how you're going to make sure that all the quality was good. And he, said a lot of really good things. And again, kept coming back to the money, how much tax revenue they were going to generate. And so I finally asked him, I'm like, okay, what's your plan to contend with the black market? And he
Yeah.
gave me a puzzled look. He just looked at me like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, with
Yeah. What black
legalization,
market?
the black
Yeah.
market is really going to start, it's going to boom. And I'm just curious what plans, how have you guys prepared for that? He's like, oh, well, it's not going to be a problem. Like that's what legalization is going to do. A legalization eliminates the black market. And I kind of looked at him, with a little bit
Yeah.
of a chuckle, and I was like, "Man, is he this naive, or is he serious?" And sadly, he was serious
Yeah.
about it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Look, man, I'm not trying to be contrarian here. Like, great for you, you got your legalized weed, but you know, for every weed operation now that every dispensary that you're opening up, I'm like, how are you gonna regulate the between what's legal, what's not legal? Like the 10, 20, 30% of the legal business that goes out the front door, the 60, 70, eighty
Right.
percent illegal that's going out the back door and all this commingling. I'm like, it just the opportunity. So maybe take a minute to educate people on, well, why would a cartel, if they could grow it with protection in Mexico, why would they come up into California? And we've even had them here in Indiana. Why would they come up and have these big grow operations hidden out in our national parks and our national forest? What's the incentive for them to do business that way?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And first and foremost is the Sinaloa and the other groups that are growing clandestine weed for export primarily to America. They're still doing it in Mexico, but they still, up until recently, had a border issue to deal with, right? They
Right.
had to get it across the border. Obviously, cannabis isn't a small product. You put 100 pounds of processed cannabis, it's a big, 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 rectangular chunk compared to, 100,000 fentanyl tablets or, a 22-pound meth cook that's divvied up.
Yeah.
So that was getting interdicted. And up until the current administration, and basically the borders began to be flooded and we stopped trying to hinder the wrong people from getting across that border, primarily the cartels. They were losing a lot of that product. So to make it in America with a distribution network that's highly structured and organized on certain pipelines to get to your part of the country from ground zero, where I'm talking to you from the Silicon Valley suburbs again, because I'm back in Cali as we have this discussion, ironically. Good timing. And then the election tomorrow, when this is still a hotbed issue on the border. And I know we
Yep.
like to stay out of the political realm as much as possible, but there's a certain level of common sense here that this cannabis problem happening domestically is there's a direct correlation to who's getting across our border to run this. And these cartel operatives, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of them, are embedded all over the country. And they've been embedded a long, long time. And they're not working for Mexico. They're basically a pipeline for Mexico. And what we got to realize is, so there's always been an incentive to grow this black market weed in America, with California being the ground zero when it started and the whole West Coast. And now it is, like you said, it's in parts of Indiana. Oklahoma's seeing it. A lot of wild land, rich conservation, open space states like the Midwest are seeing these small cartel grows. We're seeing the cartels right now in Maine. We're seeing them in Michigan. We just did some education and talked to Michigan State Police and their Special Operations Division, now dealing with cannabis problems from cartels, since they regulate it under the guise of it's going to be taxed, everyone's going to
Yeah.
go legal. And like you said, brother, there's not going to be a black market. And those guys and gals, they're treading water right now. Like, what do we do, John? What happened? And I tell them more stories from what we're talking about right now is California's become the same problem. So it's a two-pronged problem that incentive for the cartels to grow it here. And then because of just logistics of having to get it across the border and be interdicted, but then there's the incentive to grow it here because of the way we've regulated. Let's take California, for example, which most states have followed. Michigan, Oregon, Washington, Maine, Oklahoma, they've done the same thing that California's done. They've said, okay, we're going to regulate now. We're going to tax it. We're going to get funding from the growers. We're going to get permits. We're going to make it because everybody wants, to relegate weed to the back burner. It can't be a felony. We can't tie up courts with felony charges on cannabis violations. So we're going to make, an illegal growing charge or distribution charge a misdemeanor. In California, in the case of a juvenile, it's now an infraction. So basically, a $400 driving without your seatbelt ticket is a stiffer penalty than a juvenile cartel, apprentice coming up in a forest or on a private land grow house is going to see less of a severe penalty than the violation I just mentioned. So the cartels go, oh man, Disneyland is open. I got the lightning lane, the old e-ticket. I can go get property. I can move in and infiltrate. I can do an indoor grow on private property. I can do hoop houses, the big visqueen, like greenhouses. I can go out in the national forest. I can do all of that. And that's a big if, law enforcement finds my grow, because I know we got thousands of these in, say, one county. And let's talk about Siskiyou County, California for a minute, Patrick, because
All right.
that is the most remote, pristine, remote county left in California that borders Oregon to the north, and the coast to the west, the Pacific Ocean. And I've worked that county a lot with my teammates, and now retired, done some documentaries working with Daily Caller and a great young journalist that's motivated for all the right reasons, Jorge Ventura. And we were up there doing the Narcofornia documentary for Daily Caller and Fox 2 years ago. And I had worked that county like 3 or 4 years before operationally, and what that county had turned into in that 4 year gap since I retired operationally. And now that I'm there on more of an outreach element, embedded with the same sheriff's unit dope team that I worked with shoulder to shoulder when I was running our marijuana enforcement team, and going, what's going on, guys? And I won't mention names, obviously, because they're operational. We're going to keep them safe. And they're
Right.
like, John, we got to get this story out. We're underwater. You're going to go with us on 5 search warrants today. We're going to hit 5 massive private land grow complexes or in very remote areas, but they don't even have to hide anymore. Because under Prop 64, it's a misdemeanor. So there's 10,000 plus massive grow operations in Little Siskiyou County right now. And not only the Mexican cartels, but now we're seeing the Mongs and we're seeing the Chinese come in and take this niche of the black market over, and colluding with Sinaloa and other cartel factions out of Mexico, and actually collaborating on a business model to basically trade crimes and trade benefits. And what we saw up there, I'm going to get into that more specifically because we're seeing this throughout the rest of the country, that everyone that's looking at cannabis regulation or not, it's going to have a domino effect, and it's going to ripple through that pond and go much deeper to other organized crime groups that will be involved, like the Chinese. I talked about this in 2 congressional testimonies over the last year, and going back for some more, Patrick, because right now Congress and our Senate, they're finally tuning into what is China's involvement with the Mexican cartels? What are the impacts environmentally? What are the impacts on tribal nations? What are the impacts on health? All these things. And we're trying to air that out. And the American public really needs to know it. And we in the enforcement world need to know it for safety. But with that type of incentive, and these guys know, the most they're going to lose is their plants. They're not going to get arrested. The grow bosses that are running this for a Chinese triad or, say Sinaloa cartel in Northern California, those main plaza bosses, the upper level division leaders for a particular network of that crime organization structure, they're not going to get arrested. Their minions that are growing it might get detained. Maybe they get arrested and released. We're not deporting anybody. It's a misdemeanor now. So it's a misdemeanor if you grow 6 plants illegally or 60,000. There's no difference. So it's a war of attrition. They know they're going to lose maybe 10, 20% of what they're growing to enforcement, basically enforcement operations. But at the end of the day, they're still going to make possibly hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, in their grow operations, because when we hit 5 grow operations in Siskiyou County on that Friday, there were 10,000 still going on, right? So,
Yeah.
9,995 were red hot. and they were just trucking that stuff back to you. And we were watching covertly these U-Haul trucks, these 21-foot U-Haul trucks, starting on that northern highway, right out of Siskiyou County. Everybody masked up, through the COVID area. It's post-COVID, but they're wearing masks not to be identified, but it looks like they're doing a COVID protocol, right? And just daylight, after hours, 24 hours, just running truck after truck every couple of hours. And this stuff, and what we need to realize is the impacts go so far beyond just black market money being made by these cartels and fueling the fire for more criminality and harm to American public. We got to look at the poisons and pesticides that's on this weed that's going to these dispensaries, that's going to black market distribution sources that I guarantee is all over Indiana right now from California. And we're talking about carbofuran, metaphos, these poisons that have trade names like I just mentioned, that were developed back in the 40s and 50s to be basically insecticide rodenticides, but they have nerve agents in them and anticoagulants that literally the Nazis in their World War II chemical warfare program developed for the battlefield. And the EPA 30 years ago here in America got their testing technology together and analyzed this stuff and realized a 16-ounce bottle of carbofuran that's made to be diluted in 6,000 gallons of water and then sprayed on asparagus or whatever, broccoli, corn, whatever crops we're going to eat, was still determined to be too toxic for consumption, a carcinogen, a nerve agent, the whole nine. And what we're seeing these cartels do, which is mind-blowing, is put a backpack sprayer of 5 gallons of water, put half a bottle of carbofuran in it, and just spray with no protection all over these plants. And that's in the forest, right? That's what we would see on the Mexican cartel side. Now let's fast forward to just a couple months ago in Siskiyou County, Los Angeles County, back in Maine, Michigan, talking to those guys. Now you have Chinese growers from their organized crime groups in full hazmat suits, Tyvek fitted N95 breather mask systems that we have to use if we're going to go into a contaminated site, if we're going to move or even be around these plants. And they've got these 55-gallon vats of chemicals coming straight from China. They aren't even the Mexican cartel stuff that are made in Tijuana still, that they import as a felony illegally into America. Now they've got their own chemicals. There's 7 of them approximately coming from China. And they're putting on these hazmat suits. They're going in and they're spraying this stuff on the plants, but they're in enclosed structures. They're in a visqueen-lined hoop house, we call them. They're not in the open air of the forest. This stuff's on the water, it's on the machinery, it's on the soil. And then the heinous thing that's happening now, and this is really, really fresh and new only in like the last 6 months, is they're making smudge pots where they'll take one of their, rodenticides with nerve agents in it, and they'll mix it up in like an empty paint can and light it on fire to get a smoke and try to aerate that whole area and contaminate everything and make sure that stuff gets on the plant and the plant absorbs it, because no animal or insect is now going to affect that, $2,000 to $5,000 profit margin for that one big marijuana plant. But guess who's consuming that? Because it's invisible on the plant by the time it gets to Indiana, and some some kids buy it on the black market for a high school party or whatever, medicinal patients on the Eastern Seaboard. And now you've got a real toxic problem that is directly affecting our human health of people ingesting this stuff. And I think last calculation, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at about 45 million regular cannabis users in the American public, whether it's recreational, medicinal, whatever it may be. That's not going to stop. That demand is going to stay there. And these people are absorbing, or they're ingesting a ton of poison, because we know how much black market cannabis is coming into the markets everywhere throughout the country. And that's why the regulation structure has to be done correctly to de-incentivize rather than incentivize these cartels. Because right now we're just lighting a fire under their, we're encouraging them to go do this because it's easy money. And the risk of any type of penalty to shut their operation down is slim to nil.
Yeah. So here's a simple way for people to think about this. Think about your downtown area where you have all the restaurants. Now imagine for the 20 restaurants that are down there, 5 of them are doing everything the right way. They're paying their employees the right wages. They're giving benefits. They're collecting all of the tax on every meal that they sell. They're paying their taxes, and now they're in an environment where they have to compete against others that are like 8 out of 10 or 15 out of 20. Say, you know what? Why bother? Why bother paying our taxes? I can run this
Exactly.
operation, or I'll run 20% of my operation, in a legal way. So for those that are wanting to do it the right way, so it's almost like a double slap in the face. Like,
It is.
so it very, very, very frustrating when you think about it. And I'll go back to that almighty dollar. So here we are in Indiana. We're looking at, the studies have suggested that right now we're losing about $172 million a year in lost revenue that could be gained through legalization mechanisms.
Okay. And that's very attractive, on
Yeah.
its surface, right? It's really attractive for a community or a state that needs it, for
Yes.
sure.
And but there's also a figure, and depending on who you look to, but where you look for these figures, if it's from a pro legalization group, they're going to tell you you're gonna make $3 to $5 for every one that you spend. And then the anti-legalization will go just the opposite. They'll tell you you're going to wind up spending $4 to $5 on services and other issues, compared to for every $1 that you make in a
Right.
tax revenue. So it's a net loss. And if you don't set some structure about who can become a licensed dispensary, how that's all set up, then you're just consolidating a large amount of money into just a few hands, and then it's up to the rest of us to clean up. And this isn't even touching on like what you just talked about with carbofuran and all these toxins, because we already have this in our food. So now,
Right.
now if you got in your weed, just think about like the long-term ramifications to healthcare
Right.
cost. It just,
Mhm.
you're talking billions of dollars. This is crazy. So yeah, I don't want to sound all doom and gloom here, but as we're thinking about doing this, I just want people to understand, like, it's not just unintended consequences. These are
Right.
real consequences that we know because we've watched what's happened in other states. And so that's why I really do appreciate your time being here to educate us today, so we can spread the word and try to do it the best way that we can, and not be reckless or short-sighted about it, because we're in a race to try to capture some of these things that we're losing. Because you say, and one of the things, and I think I mentioned this on our pre-call, but as these discussions were floating, and I'm just kind of sitting here in retirement now doing my podcast, and I'm watching, and everybody's getting all
Yeah.
excited about this. I'm like, all right, there's nobody talking about the downside. Like,
Right.
there's a downside here, and I don't want to be old negative Nelly here, but that's why I started. That's why I started, writing about it, inquiring about it. I'm at my 91-year-old mother's house a few weeks ago,
Nice.
and we're 2 hours from the Michigan border, hour and a half, like an hour and a half from Chicago, uh, and my mom's getting flyers and coupons for a dispensary in Michigan. Like,
Great. Yeah.
it's not even legal here in Indiana. So I have a friend. It's in New Buffalo, Michigan, right across the Indiana border, up by Michigan City, Indiana. And I just did a quick Google search, and I wrote about it in my Substack, so people can go back and look at that. But I think there's 14, 16 dispensaries in a town of like 1,100 people, right over the Indiana border. So
Yeah.
yeah, what does that tell you? And so I have a friend that does have a place there. So I call him and I'm like, hey, why are New Buffalo sending my 91-year-old mom, dispensary ads?
The dispensary
Yeah.
advertisements, man. What's with that?
He just laughs. He's like, man, he's like, it's crazy. He's like, you can't throw a rock and not hit a dispensary up there. And he said
Yeah.
there is a lot of people from Indiana, and that's why they put them there, is because they know people are coming up over the border. And yeah, so I have some future discussions planned with some of our police departments up there up in South Bend and Michigan City and those areas, just to
Nice.
kind of talk about some of the issues that they're having. But Yeah, I mean, it's not long now where Kentucky and Ohio, they both have passed legislation on medicinal. So recreational is not far behind. So we'll be on an island. We'll be surrounded by states where it's legal. So it just, yeah, again, that's why it's kind of like, all right, well, it's going to be it's going to be almost impossible not to do something because we're still like now you just have Indiana residents going across and spend, for the ones that are buying it legally, they're just buying, they're
Yeah.
spending their money in Michigan and in Illinois, but they're bringing all the problems back to Indiana with it. So
Well, absolutely. And you just hit a good point. Every state around you now is regulated, but I guarantee there might be a little bit of nuances and differences in how those states are regulated, but at the end of the day, I'll bet a C note and a steak dinner right now that there is no felony charges involved in illegal cultivation or distribution. I'm sure they watered it down to a misdemeanor. Colorado did it, and every state that we're dealing with now that we're educating in, we're talking about our horror stories from California, have that same regulation structure because that seems to be the selling point to get the votes, right? Well,
right.
if this is a felony, then why would we regulate it at all if there's a felony side to it? But what we've proposed over in Cali is, hey, man, reward those good growers that are doing it by the numbers. They've come out of the dark. They're putting a lot of money, time, and effort, and now they're paying taxes, and they're not used to that. They have their own, barter and cash money system that goes back to like the 1800s, and
Yeah, their
they're
own
coming out.
halalas.
Now we're Right. Yeah. And we're pushing them back and basically disenfranchising them at the same time while incentivizing. So I've always said in Cali, we got to bring the felony back into illegal cultivation. And we got to go after those poisons and do this and go for penalties that are fairly strict. It's just a sedate weed thing. Look at it as a public safety, public health, environmental situation. And it's really not about cannabis. It's no dig on cannabis. I was quoted about 10 years ago by the Associated Press of saying, hey, look, we're not here to, we're not demonizing cannabis in any way, right? If cherry tomatoes were yielding $4,000 a pound on the black market and they had some illegality to them, we'd be having gunfights and there would be poison carbofuran on cherry tomatoes. So don't look at it as a weed thing. Look at it as a public safety environmental crime issue. And what we have to do to protect our public under that lens is we have to tighten up weed regulations. But you and I both know state by state by state, that's an uphill battle because all those regulations are going to be a little different. And whatever state's the most lenient is the state that's going to, supply a lot of the black market corner if it's got a good growing environment, indoor, outdoor. And California is one of the, most lenient now under Prop 64, and we're the Great Mediterranean. So we're supplying most of the nation's black market stuff, and 90% plus of that's coming from cartel grows. So we need to look at another step further. And I know you and I talked about this in the pre-discussion, the intro, is, and most law enforcement guys agree, this stuff needs to be regulated like wine, alcohol, and tobacco. It needs to be
Yeah.
uniformly quality controlled, taxed at a general rate, affordable on a sliding scale. Now, there is still cigarette smuggling and a little bit of alcohol, but by no means is that the cartel's bread and butter. I don't see Sinaloa or Jalisco New Generation going, oh man, we're pushing cigarettes and making billions. It's not happening. And until we do that nationally, I think we're going to have an uphill battle. But I just I just
Yeah, you
hope
got
and
to set the
pray.
stage, right? I mean, and you have to do
Yeah,
it in a fair way. And
you
you talk
do.
about that in your book, and I really appreciated that part of the conversation because for the people that are trying to do it right,
Yes.
you've got to get enough. It's like momentum in anything. If
Mhm.
if it, and I think you mentioned it's more of an 80-20 rule where 20% are doing it right, 80% are like, why would we even bother,
Yeah.
especially
No
when you've
point.
decriminalized it. So for those 20%, the incentive is there for them to be allied with with the state in order to get the regulation. So someone doesn't have an unfair competitive environment that they're operating
Agreed.
in. So if we can tax it like we do tobacco and alcohol and others, then we can flip that. We can make it more of an
Agreed.
80-20 rule.
For
And the
sure.
80% of the people doing it the right way, and now what you're doing, it's like displacement theory in crime. And I think most people are familiar with that, right? If you can create displacement and move criminals around, then you create exposure for them. And the
Very
more
much so.
exposure they
Yeah.
have, the more opportunities law enforcement has to interdict. And that's what we need to get to is and yeah, so that's pretty interesting. But so before we go any further too, because you touched on we kind of glossed over it earlier. When you talked about the Met teams that you formed, I really want to give you a shitload of credit for that because so
Thanks, man.
it's very difficult to be forward thinking in American law enforcement. It really is. We are a
Yeah.
institution that is baked in tradition, and we do not really learn our lessons easily. And I think everyone has kind of
Mhm.
seen that over the last decade, maybe more than anything else. So for you to recognize, in that first, well, I think it was when you were on Rogan, you were telling the story where you went out like on one of these first grows where you kind of got the first taste of the scope of this problem with a
Right.
civilian, and you go walking out there with your gear, you got a rifle and your handgun, but you've got an unarmed civilian with you, and you walk into this grow operation, and now you got cartel members, they're carrying rifles and handguns
Yeah.
themselves. You're outgunned in your own backyard from illegal cartel grow operators. So it's like maybe touch on the danger that part of
Yeah.
it also, because you've been in a lot of gunfights and a lot of like really hairy situations, far more than most domestic law enforcement is ever involved in. Yeah, so I think it's important for people to really hear like this is no joke, man. This is some scary shit.
Yeah, it's a little bit mind blowing, and getting to the point where we even had the opportunity to form up the marijuana enforcement team. The stars had to align, and from being a chief, and politics of who you report to, and for us, we work directly for the governor, right? We're state agency, we're into resources. But it was that first grow site you're talking about in '04, where I had an unarmed civilian, a lifelong friend that's a wildlife biologist, and he's in a pristine area with endangered species and steelhead trout on this beautiful couple of rivers or creeks. One's dried up. I throw him in the truck. Same old thing. I think I'm going to find a farmer, diverting water. And we dive into the canyon, and he had good wood skills, and I've been in the woods all my life. So fortunately, we weren't making too much noise, and we crawled in on my first grow site. And unbeknownst to me, it was a Sinaloa grow operation, and the guys were in full BDUs, and they weren't speaking, English, and they were showing tactical situational awareness. And one had the AK, the other had the machete, and was tending plants. And I went, "This isn't a farmer diverting water, man. What are we looking at?" And this happened to be literally in the backyard below Henrico State Park, where I grew up my whole life, learning to hunt, fish, hike, and whatnot. So that was an eye opener, that we had a much bigger enemy, I think, to the environment than what we ever anticipated as Americans, right? And then the very next summer, on August 5th, 2005, that I talk about in both books, was when we were ambushed, helping the sheriff's department, the marijuana eradication team out of Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, fantastic tactical unit. And it's myself, and promoted to lieutenant, and with two young game wardens that wanted to help out, going on their first grow raid. And here we are. It was a much bigger operation than we thought. There were 32,000 plants on that hill. There were multiple grows, probably 20 armed growers in the middle of harvest time. We had some Sicario gunman types defending the grow, and one of the bad guys got one shot off out of an AK-47 derivative rifle that happened to go through my young partner's legs. And he had four holes, because that 7.62 by 39 AK round steel core went through the left leg and tumbled all the way through his other leg. So he's bleeding out of four massive holes. And now we're trying to keep him from bleeding to death and waiting 3 hours for an air rescue. And I'm engaged in a gunfight with his shooter and other guys that are coming at me, and another warden that we don't even see, another gunman. Fortunately, was neutralized by my sheriff's partners, because a second later we wouldn't be having this conversation. I was that close, 7 yards through this heavy brush and marijuana, densely wooded area, to take in a shotgun blast of buckshot out of a 12 gauge right in the face. That day right there told me, and I don't even think it was an overt, I think it was more of a subliminal thing at the time. I said, okay, we have a much bigger fish to fry now in the environmental contingent. And we saw the environmental destruction in that grow site, but we didn't see the banned poisons yet. We were going to start seeing those as we helped the sheriffs more and more. And that just kind of became a niche. I just felt like with the water damage, the poisons, the threat these people pose to hikers, outdoor equestrian folk, anybody recreating out there, hunters, anglers. Um, and that was all in the wilds. And then when the regulation started and they moved into like hiding in plain sight and rural tracks, grower after grower after grower, and American communities and families from veteran families, last great generation in towns like Siskiyou County and all those little tiny mountain towns are now leaving after 100 years of having their farms, their ranches, their family in that rural utopia that they always wanted to live in because it's 100 growers to one family person, right? Or one
Yeah.
traditional rancher. Um, so it was a long process. It was about 13 years before Met was even greenlit by a super progressive chief, and I mentioned him in the book, my friend,
Yep.
that grew me up to be an instructor, Mike Carry-On. He made it happen. Um, in a political climate in California that wasn't going to have anything to do with that. We had a little window that we could have made it work. And you said it best. And I think the analogy retired Chief Nancy Foley and a good friend of mine says, and she tells her cadets before she retired, she says, guys, game wardens are often misunderstood as being burn bunny cops. They just check fishermen, they kind of do nature walks. People don't really know the depth of what we have to do and how we have to integrate with police and sheriffs. We're all doing the same job. Ultimately, at some level, we're just our forte is the wildlife stuff. And she said, remember through your career, if you see something that needs to be changed to be progressive, that's a scary thing because change is inevitable, but growth is optional.
Yep.
And those 6 words, brother, have stuck in me since Nancy said that. And I'm going back
Yes.
15 years. And we had her on our Warden's Watch podcast tonight. We talked about that quote and how as profound it is. Um, so yeah, there was an uphill battle there, but we were super lucky to make it happen. And then once it does happen, now people can't ignore it, right? It's one thing to hear the stories. It's another thing to see the documents, the documentation. And my book goes into what did we do the first 6 years we had Met when I was running the team, and now the lieutenant that replaced me, that was one of my young snipers and just a great operator. He's just left running the team for another 5 years and gone back to patrol. In fact, we'll be doing some hunts together here very soon, and just kind of catching up. But this thing has grown to a point where you look at the numbers and it's mind blowing. I mean, our little team in 6 years, 3 million toxically tainted marijuana cannabis plants were eradicated out of cartel grows. And we're one small California out of a lot of teams doing different
Three
stuff. And we
million.
weren't all on the same missions. And you look at 900 arrests, give or take, of felons with criminal histories, national watch lists out of Mexico, embedded, running with impunity. And if they're not in grow sites in the winter, they were cooking methamphetamine in 22-pound super cooks. And we interdicted one of those plaza bosses. And in chapter 4, we talk about me getting to sit in on that
Yeah.
debrief of this guy we caught with DEA. And I won't give it away, but we were able to validate a lot of things we suspected about these guys and how can we slow them down and what are they really looking at? What do they really think law enforcement efforts are doing to their operation? And is it impeding them whatsoever? What is this border? Does this border even slow them down? I mean, it was sobering before what we're experiencing now. So every American needs to know, man. I don't say it lightly, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this is a domestic ecoterrorism operation going on in America that affects everybody directly or indirectly. And we all got to be prepared and concerned. And I'm really lucky to talk to you about it, brother, because this is what I call shedding some light on the hidden war. And book 2 was named The Hidden War because this has been going on a long time. We've done documentaries. We did 3 years of Wild Justice TV, Game Warden reality show, Nat Geographic, some books, some documentaries when I ran the team before we got that gag order not to talk to press anymore. We made the biggest dent we could because it's one thing to do the work and make the stats. It's another thing if it's happening in the rest of the country and nobody's seeing it and nobody's learning from our mistakes, and we're not really paying it forward, and nor are we getting the issue out to all the our American public. But I'm starting to see, I mean, even with the divisiveness going on, and ironically, we have this, election tomorrow, and we know how divided and maniacal it's gotten to this point, right? But
Yeah, it's
now
gonna
I'm
be
looking at
crazy.
the fact that because of congressional attention, because of podcasts like this, and because I get to keep pushing it, and you get to keep pushing it in your home state, um, that we eliminate those boundaries and we look at this as a national problem, not in Indiana, not a California, not a Montana, not a New York, whatever. And I think people are starting to really pay attention because of the impact on their children and the fentanyl crisis. And if you rope in the weed problems with the same groups and rope in the China factor now, there's no ignoring it. It's got to be a national priority. And I just hope whatever happens after tomorrow, this gets handled with the money it needs, with the education, not just the law enforcement efforts, the environmental impact, the repairs, all of that. I mean, if we can put billions upon billions of dollars into conflicts outside of our nation, these proxy wars,
Yeah.
if you will, we got to take care of the home front first. I'll just leave it at that with the generalities and we don't go down a rabbit hole. But I think we've been skewed in our thinking because I see it every day and I'm in the woods every day, right? And you see
Yep.
it as a narcotics team leader and you saw the evilness and we've both seen that and we're doing as much good work as we can with our partners, but I see a lot of morale issues with law enforcement fighting this problem right now because policies and politics are absolutely contradicting the efforts. And I want to talk about my friends in border protection on the southern border that I work with and train with, both the northern border near me in Montana and then the southern border down here in Mexico. And you want to talk about some men and women just laying it all out there and feeling absolutely combat ineffective right now.
Yeah, that's crazy what's
It's
happening with them.
demoralizing and good people are leaving the profession or worse yet, they're crawling into substance and they just don't want to be there. So a lot of issues that I think if we just attack it as a priority, we can start to make maybe a little bit of headway. And it starts with education. It doesn't happen any other way, is awareness.
Well, when you work the streets as a cop, like one of the things that you just get exposed to human misery over and over
Mhm.
again. So it's not it's
Heartbreaking. Yeah.
yeah, it is heartbreaking, but you do kind of get calloused to it a bit. I think we're now
Yep.
realizing it's probably taken a much bigger toll on police officers than we ever wanted to admit before. But
Sadly
I,
true. Yeah.
I love the audiobook. The audiobook is freaking fantastic. So for anyone that's
Awesome.
listening, you have to listen because they do the production on it. I listen to audiobooks all the time. That's one of the best ones I've ever listened to. So you did a
I
great
bet.
job. There's a lot of
Thank you.
suspense that's added in with the music and stuff. I like it. But the one thing that the audiobook can't do that the paperback and the hardcover can
Yeah.
do
You
is
got
like
your coffee. There we go.
yeah,
Oh,
so
yeah.
so when you're looking like what you can't show are
Right.
like pictures of the wildlife. Like you have images of a mountain lion that's been poisoned and black bears and just the amount of environmental destruction that these chemicals are doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can't get people to necessarily care about other people, but generally we can get everyone to agree like, well, that just sucks. Like that's just not fair
Yeah.
for animals and to have to be exposed to, that type of cruelty and that the just the lack of compassion or care. Um, you know, aside from the damage that it's doing to the waterways and everything else.
Right.
So yeah, I really yeah, I encourage people to do both. Buy the book and listen and get the audio version while you're at it. But um, I was just in a meeting this morning with some police officers on another project that I'm working on, and that there was that sentiment is there. It's not just at the Border
Yeah.
Patrol; it's in
Right.
American law enforcement
It's
across
everywhere. Yeah.
across the country. It's like,
Yep.
man like things are getting decriminalized. It's like we don't, and maybe that's the right answer, maybe it's not, but it seems, and I've kind of gone on these rants before, so I'll make it quick. It seems like sometimes in America, the only group that we want to hold accountable to any type of standard is law enforcement. Like,
Yeah.
we'll hold law enforcement accountable to make sure they're doing their job. People like if people do something wrong, they're getting convicted, they're going to jail.
Right.
Where it seems like nobody else, there's like no accountability. Like the growers in this case, like and the people that are doing all this environmental destruction, it's kind of like we just give them a free pass. And then when you like, particularly if you decriminalize it for minors, then uh, a lot of our gang offenders are carrying our shooters are under the age of 18 because they know that the penalties are less. The people that
Yeah.
run the gangs know that, hey, if I'm going to send someone out to go shoot up a house, I'm going to send a couple of 14-year-olds, one, because they're easy to convince, but two, they're not going to suffer the same type of consequences that an adult gang member is going to.
Right.
So anyway, I digress, and I agree 100%. And I've made this point many times, like the defunding of the police, and it's this episode is not going to air before the election, but I would tell anyone that would listen, I don't care what color you root for, but if you think that defunding the police was the right answer, just go look at every municipality that's done that, from all the way from Vermont all the way out to the Midwest, all the way out to the West Coast. It's I mean, we've literally destroyed some cities.
We
And
really have. Yeah.
yeah, and I always say it this way, like, okay, all right, you think there's a problem with policing, you think we need to reimagine it or whatever you want to call it. Um, if think of any business, any endeavor that maybe is struggling, that needs a shot of new life. Do you ever hear anyone say, well, here's what we think the problem is that uh, policing is getting your business is getting too much money, so we're going to cut your
Right.
budget in half,
Yeah.
and
Give you
then we're going to
that. Yeah.
expect you to perform at
Yeah.
a much higher level. So it's kind of like, you know, uh,
Yeah. It ridiculous, and it's been a flawed experiment from the start. Everyone's seen that it's failed. But I want to get back to a couple things you mentioned. When
yeah,
you mentioned the Audible, and I'm going to give an example from a book and why the pictures are important. But the Audible, I got to give a shout out to our Audible producer, Trammell Starks. He's in Atlanta. He's a Billboard artist, musician, record producer. So when he read the book, he wasn't quite sure what he was signing us up for to read for this, because our publishing group is Recoil, Recoil Off Grid, Blade Magazine, and Caribou Gun Digest, which is the book side of that brand. And they're back in the Midwest and they're very patriotic, very conservation oriented. And they're like, we haven't done an Audible book, but maybe we should. What do you think? I said, yeah, I think we should. That's where we're going. We're listening to podcasts and we're listening to books. We're not
yep,
reading or really watching anything. And that wasn't in the works, man. But Trammell said, I got to score this thing musically and I got to put in sound effects because the dog and Canine Phoebe and the stuff you guys were
yeah,
encountering and the dog stories. He had a dog. He loved dogs. That was critical. But something that is important about the pictures, and the publisher was good enough to put a lot of color pictures, as you notice, in the middle of the book, and then black and
yes,
white through all of the chapters, and encouraged me to supply more and more of them, was to tell a story. Because one thing you said it, when you see dead bears that are poisoned, right? A cub in the tree above the mother
yeah.
sound.
That picture was very powerful.
Well, it's powerful and it's unifying, right? So
Yeah.
I'm talking to a year before we're going to regulate, we gave all the growers a grace period. I'm being the lieutenant of the Met team. I had to go around the state to these California Growers Association groups where those black market growers by the hundreds are coming into the light to go to like a formal setting. And I'm on a panel with grow regulators and everything else talking about the pitfalls. And they're like, oh man, he can't be here. He's working us. I'm like, well, relax. I'm not looking at plates. We're not following you back to your grow. I'm going to be up for 20 minutes. I got a PowerPoint. I'm going to tell a story. We're here to educate. There is no enforcement action going on. And they're like, okay, a little freaked out. And I start
Yeah, I
telling the
bet.
story,
I bet that
right?
cracked
And I
me.
start
Yeah, when I
showing the,
listened to that.
yeah, I mean, from working, narcotic suspects, you're not going to be in the same room under that
No,
auspice very often.
not
But
unless you're holding a big cleaver over their head. Like,
yeah, yeah, amen. But I start showing the pictures you're talking about and telling the stories, and I have men and women growers that are bawling their eyes out, that are stamping and getting pissed off and shaking their fists. And I say it best. I said, whether you're a preservationist or a conservationist, whether you're anti-hunting, pro-hunting, we can all sit in the same room. No animal should die that way, right? You
right.
want to see your wildlife out there. Should your water be poisoned that way? Do you want to see dead deer? Do you want your kid not to see a steelhead trout migrate on your grow site? And I can't tell you, in such a negative subject matter, I'm going back to my truck, putting all my outreach supplies away, loading the canine up in the back, and I got 20 growers, no exaggeration, running up to get me at the truck before I leave. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, this is going to get Western. What do they need? And it was these growers with resources in the Emerald Triangle in Northern California saying, hey, Lieutenant, here's my business card. I have 20 employees. We have a regulated grow. We will travel with dump trucks, with trucks. environmental reclamation, destruction stuff you're showing us. We haven't seen this. Some of our people have competed with the cartels before. This is absolutely un-American and horrendous, and we're at your disposal. I never envisioned that being a deal, Patrick. But I can tell you that's the type of mindset we got to go in moving forward on a national scale and put our differences aside politically and go, hey, this cartel is a domestic enemy. It's harming all of us in weed, in environment, in fentanyl, in human trafficking. Pick a number, pick a crime. They're doing it at the expense of all of us. So we're going to agree to disagree. And we might not be socializing together tonight and having dinner together, but let's unify on this fight. And I can honestly say, edition 1 and edition 2 of the book now, going in 6 years since retirement, that's been the one positive motivator I've seen from my law enforcement partners dealing with that in California. Obviously, what you guys are going to experience here in Indiana and how you can bridge that gap with different sides of the political fence, that is encouraging, and I've had pessimistic moments like I'm sure you have, right, in your career, because it is that uphill battle and that
At least
defund the
once a day,
police.
right?
Oh man, maybe five, yeah, especially what we're coming out of. But I digress too, and I don't want to belabor it. But that's the benefit, and just getting it out there, man. And I really thank you for helping educate and what you're doing back east. And I really hope that it helps curtail the mistakes that could be made at your state or any Midwestern state that hasn't regulated yet until we nationally regulate. And that's a ways off. I agree with you; it will happen. But just don't do what California did. It's going to
Yeah,
be it'll be a proverbial shit show. Pardon my French, no exaggeration. It will be a shit show.
well, and I'm just sitting here thinking, you're talking like 3 million plants, 3 million. That's what you guys uncovered. And I'm thinking, if it's like any other criminal enterprise, we're lucky if we're getting 5 to 10%. So and maybe you're doing much better in California, but that just means that there's probably 100 million that you didn't catch, right? So,
For
um,
sure. And that's
yeah,
outdoor, deep in the woods, grows that are between 2,000 and in an extreme situation, 50,000 plants. What you're going to deal with once you regulate is all of our outdoor pristine wildlife area growers, most of those 80+% of them, they're not hiding anymore. They're not going way out in the forest, which is a good thing. But now they're going to these rural tracts like Siskiyou County. And now you've got 10,000 grow houses that are all a quarter mile from each other, sucking from the same underground water table and creeks. And you're not talking about 3 million plants that are illegal. You're talking about hundreds of millions of plants, and they all have the same poisons on them. They're all going out into the black market. So it is no exaggeration, exponentially worse in California with the effects of regulation than when we were fighting them deep in the woods. I'd take a deep woods fight any day right now. As hard and arduous as that was to go deep into those woods and fight those elements in the summers, our Met team would say, "Hey, we'd rather do that right now than deal with this private, whack-a-mole, stack them up." And it's one of those things. I know you and I talked about this in the intro conversation of
yeah.
we keep throwing all these tactical teams and great equipment. We're reclamating. We've got helicopters. Cannabis money has given us the best of the best. From a tactical standpoint, that's been great. But our tactical team hits one, your team hits another here in Indiana, and we keep moving around the whack-a-mole and keep plugging the holes in this dam that's leaking like a sieve. It's time for a new dam.
Yeah.
The whole infrastructure of how we regulate, we got to build a new dam to keep these holes from popping up, right? Like a flawed concrete mix. It's obvious now, and I think we're starting to make a dent. I think we're
So,
close.
all right. So I knew this was going to happen. This time just going to fly. I want to be respectful of your time. So you mentioned something I'm curious about, with some of your partners out there that you're working with up on the northern border. Everybody's very familiar with the issues that we have at the southern border.
Yes.
So what what would be just a couple of things that people would probably find, whether it's regarding the illicit drug trade or not, like on the northern border? What are some of the things that you guys are seeing there, or that your compatriots out there are experiencing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And ironically, I'm a stone's throw from the Alberta border where I'm at, northwest Montana. And it's the most remote, the smallest populated county, and the most remote timber left in the lower 48. until you get to Alaska on that part of the state. So people can hide very easily. So meth, fentanyl, white dope is really, really a big thing. Our tribal lands up on a little east of me, and I just this was one of the hearings in Congress we had to address specifically that I talked about on a panel related to tribal lands. Sinaloa cartel coming all the way from central Mexico, going up into the most remote tribal land area near the Canadian border on tribal lands, and basically turning tribal communities into complete fentanyl addicted, decimated communities. And then also impacting that from the northern border by supplying some of those, clandestine materials that they need. I mean, just horror stories, man, absolute horror stories, because again, it's remote. And it's like, game wardens are considered very scarce. And, my patrol district through most of my career was at least 250 square miles. And you go, oh my gosh, that's one guy for that. And you don't have partners,
Right.
you're spread way out. Well, BIA agents, right? Tribal police, there might be two tribal policemen for 500,000 square acres on tribal land. And cartel grows we were dealing with cartel grows in Northern California on tribal lands because unless there was an MOU between us and tribal police, they weren't getting worked. And the cartels know that.
Yep,
Um,
they sure
so,
do.
so to your point, the northern border is as sensitive, in some cases more so, because what they can impact directly and how much easier they can hide. So that is definitely an issue up there. And some of the border patrol agents that I know directly or indirectly up in the northern part of the nation have been doing dual duty lately. They've been being shipped down to the southern border to work for a month or more and then come
Yeah,
back
at
home.
processing stations and yeah.
Yeah, and it's exactly what it's processing stations, and it's demoralizing, and we can't too much to go into right now, but heartbreaking to hear their stories. But then they're going back up to, the pristine mountains where we want to be in a rural community. Guys like you and I that love the outdoors, want to hunt and fish, want a little bit of fresh air, not be stacked on top of each other. And now we got, the same cartels dropping in from the northern side, Alberta and further east, and hitting the tribal communities and or supplying our kids with bad fentanyl. That's the trend right now. And to say, they're undermanned like we were as a Met team, right? As game wardens throwing this thing together is an understatement.
Yeah,
And, I think tomorrow will have a lot to do with where some of those support efforts go, because I do wholeheartedly, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think a secure border is just a no-brainer. And it doesn't have anything to do with legitimate immigration. We are a country, a melting pot of immigrants, and that's what makes America so amazing. They're two separate conversations. None of this is has anything to do with immigration. It has to do with protecting the border for every person in America that's here, regardless of nationality and background, right? Um,
absolutely.
and we've lost that in the rhetoric. We've lost that in the narrative. And that I think that's part of that, taking this hidden war as a national priority. And that's one of five things we attack right away. And we put the money, we put the time, we put the agents, we educate as we need to from our children on up. And I don't think it would be that tough to do. We just have to be wired that way at the top, and maybe we will be. We'll see.
We're gonna find out.
Crazy timing, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, I couldn't miss it when you said, "Hey, what about this day?" I'm like, "Hey, yeah, that's a good day."
yeah,
I'd like to talk to you the calm before the storm, because I think tomorrow's going to get pretty weird. Yeah.
yeah. I have to agree. And I wasn't going to go here, but since we brought it up, I just watched last week O'Keefe's documentary "Line in the Sand."
Yeah.
And, I don't care what you think of the guy, whether you think he's, a wacko or legit, journalist, whatever.
Right.
I thought what he did took some serious stones. Like, he went down into Mexico, hopped, and embedded with the migrants that were coming up. And
Yes.
if you haven't watched it, it is yeah, I mean,
Oh, it's mind blowing. Yeah,
it's,
and
for
it's
people that aren't experiencing it and seeing it firsthand.
yep.
Yeah, I think it's really, really disturbing. And I worry most about the children. And I know those things get politicized a lot, but yeah, border is just, I mean, come on. I mean, this is silly. And I have a lot of very liberal friends, and they all agree. We all agree. Like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but yet we do it anyway. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah. And
digress.
really hope it turns around. But no, that is a real good documentary. Jorge Ventura that I worked with that did a great job, and he's really become a Southern Border correspondent now with News Nation. He embedded with migrants, so literally jumped in the Rio Grande and crossed with them and watched one or two of them drown each day, right through that, and saw, these unattended children, what, a couple 100,000 kids that have just disappeared into the trafficking network, and no guardians to see. He saw all that happen. He saw deals being made. I mean, it was, and it hasn't even been documented yet, but it's the same thing as O'Keefe's. How do you deny that? How do you
Yeah.
see that in real time and go, that
Yeah.
we're just going to
Yeah.
let go because our party, hasn't done anything about it? Well, I think you're right. I think that finally, liberal, conservative, doesn't even matter. As human beings, man, as good humans and trying to protect our next generation, there's a no-brainer right here. And um, we're close. We're close. Let's keep our fingers and prayers, the fingers crossed and prayers going tonight.
Yeah. All right, let's just take a couple minutes. If I can keep you for another 10 minutes.
Sure.
I want to close out with some data because these are some of the things that I want people to consider and just maybe get some of your thoughts on some of this data. And
Okay.
some of this comes from it was a document that was produced by the Federal Reserve, Brown, Cohen, and Felix. There's some data that they
Hmm.
had, but they were, when we're here in Indiana, when we're thinking about legalization, going back to that, how many dollars in revenue are we going to bring in,
Right.
versus how much is going to go out in the spend. And so I want people to think about some of these
Yeah.
statistics. So legalizing recreational marijuana has led to some, what they say, moderate economic gains, such
Yeah.
as a 3% rise in the average state income per capita, 6% increase in housing prices, and a 2% population growth. However, it also correlates with higher social costs, including substance use disorders up 17%,
Hmm.
chronic homelessness up 35%, and arrest up 13%. So we want to decriminalize marijuana. So these are, I mean, if you think about it, right, we're probably not making marijuana arrest, but we're making other arrest because of issues that addiction and homelessness can create. So
Correct.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think you're 100%. And when it comes to regulation, a big part of that isn't just the criminality and what statute you put on it or what moniker you pin on growing, non-regulated cannabis or importing banned poisons or diverting water, whatever. It gets down to what you just said. What are the back effects? What are the peripherals? What's the spider web of, gateway drugs to, it being a gateway substance for some people, to harder drugs, to white dope, to, burglaries, to violent crimes, whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah.
Um, Not to mention the effects of these poisons. We know I've got countless stories of officers that have been exposed that have lost vision for, 8, 9, 10 days, still have nervous issues with central nervous system damage,
Yeah.
respiratory problems. Um,
We
People are
lost a lot
ingesting,
of a lot of officers in the meth days to those meth labs from
right.
cancers and the carcinogens and that.
Yep. And it's the same type of thing. That is a byproduct of this if this stuff isn't a pure, sedate, organically tested product. So again, that has to all be part of it. And we've regulated for the money. We haven't looked at the after effects, and we've increased and incentivized those byproduct problems that you just accurately stated and itemized very cleanly. And that being said, it tells us our regulation structure isn't working. It's not comprehensive. It's not addressing the dark side because it wants it to look on it. We need to have a light side on this thing for the sake of legislators and voters. and make it a non-issue when it's really exacerbating a lot of issues, that are negative,
Yeah.
especially the other crimes. And not to mention, I mean, forget any of the, ill effects of the black market cannabis world. Let's look at the fact that we are basically putting money in the hands of pockets of, you know, deportable felon criminals that have no love for America. They have no love for wildlife, and they certainly don't care about your health, my health, our kids, our grandkids. They don't give a you know what. So at the end
Right.
of the day, we are incentivizing and empowering them with more money, more resources, and more bravado to continue to not only poison through, bad regulate or bad cannabis, but jump over on a fentanyl operation with impunity and meth. So that's what people aren't going to see. And if they see the graphic examples, they're going to go, okay, if we're going to regulate, I want to see it uniform, right? And I want to see somebody doing something that's going to harm my children still a felony and go after it as hard and go after water theft because water is now the white gold. It's a super commodity in the world with the drought we're
Sure
facing,
is.
not only in America, right, brother, but all over the globe. And when we got the water loss figures to our governor, the first governor before our current governor, Brown before Newsom, wanting to regulate cannabis and deny the fact that cartels were embedded in California, be a sanctuary state, telling us as statewide officers that are federally deputized with federal IDs under, the Department of the Interior, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that now we can't work with ICE, we can't work with Border Patrol when asked on information. What? Where'd that directive come from? But again, that's hidden war last
It
chapter
makes
that
you
got
scratch your head, right? It really
Oh
does.
man,
It
yeah. And I don't need to belabor it because it's in the book, but for
yeah,
for those of you getting the book, go when you get to the last chapter, you're going to look at a little treatise on what we're discussing right now. What have we seen 5 years after regulation, 7 years after regulation? What's not adding up? And I think we just need to do it sensibly, but people are going to have to look past the money and they're going to have to cooperate with other states. And at the end of the day, I just hope that this thing gets regulated nationally and it breaks the majority of the back of cartel dirty cannabis, being out there. The other crimes, the trafficking, the fentanyl and everything else, that's another issue.
yeah,
Related, of course, part of the same group, but the one that affects our environment the most, especially on water theft and loss of wildlife, which is near and dear to you and me both outside of our world as public servants, as police officers, is cannabis because what it does to our triple W's, wildlife, waterways, and wildlands. And I'll go to the grave preaching it. I'm impassioned about it. It pisses me off. I still, hear war stories from my, previous partners, and I know they're playing whack-a-mole, fighting an uphill battle, and it breaks my heart. It just does. So whatever we can do to, keep them safe and make them more effective and remedy, it's going to be, the pin, not the sword. It's going to be what we're doing today, right now. So I appreciate it big time.
yeah. And in terms of federalization too, and I know there's a lot of people don't like that term, um, but states like Washington and Colorado, they've already, they call it what, the first mover advantage.
Yeah.
Since they were the first ones to legalize, they were and being early adopters, they got a lot of economic benefits, job creation,
Yeah.
some of that population growth, tax revenue. Now they're probably regretting some of that population growth because
Right.
it's come in the form of homelessness. But
Huh?
any cop that's worked the street for a while is we've been dealing with that, pretty significantly for the last 10 years. But
Yeah.
states like here in Indiana, when you're one of the last, you're just going to see fewer economic benefits, but you're still going to face all the social challenges that come with it. So I think there is some advantage maybe to do this from a federal perspective, and then you throw in crime and public safety concerns. So in some of these states where you haven't necessarily seen a significant increase in arrest rates or police targeting certain types of legalization, legal operations, like you would, every state calls them, something a little bit different, but
Yeah.
your state and local
Yeah.
alcohol, police, cigarette police, stuff like that. Um, but there is a significant problem, and the NHTSA data has borne out, right? Like when you're going to legalize marijuana, the question you might have to ask yourself as a legislator, when you say yes and you sign on, you push that button that says yes, there's a number, you're pushing a button that's going to authorize the deaths of more people on your highways. and
Right.
roadways.
Yeah.
We've seen that
Very
in
good
every
point.
state that's legalized.
Yeah.
The
Very
number
good.
of fatalities on the roadway from people that are driving under the influence of THC is just up. Now, people might want to get in, they get into the weeds about, well, yeah, you can't, it's harder to tell whether they were high or not. Just because someone smoked yesterday, they might have THC in their system today. But when they're using, and most people are using THC and alcohol, it's not like a one or the other. Oh, now
Right.
that marijuana is legal, I'll never drink again. We
Right.
know
That's a
that
good.
that's
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
case. And
Uh-huh.
so that just creates, a safety hazard on the roadways. So,
Yeah.
what number is enough, right? That's the question that I want to ask when you're going to hit yes is like, what's your number? Like, is it 100 lives a year? Is it
It's a really
150?
good question, man. It's a really good question. And I don't know, we in general as people, and I think it's a human condition, we don't learn from history very well. And look at prohibition with alcohol and then coming
Yeah.
out of that and legalizing and look at the amount of fatalities and, DUIs, all of that. It's something we've learned to live with because unfortunately, we know we're going to have demand for alcohol and so many hundreds of millions of Americans are going to drink. That fine line is, can we get them to drink responsibly and really, really hammer down when they don't? When they do put that fatality risk, how many times is enough before they go away for a long, long time, or they don't get three tries, right? A wet, reckless, whatever. I think we got to look at cannabis the same way. I think you're 100%,
Yeah.
man. I really do. It's not like, oh, it's regulated, everyone's going to use it. It's not in theory as harmful as alcohol, but you're still inebriated. You still don't have the capacity to make the reactions and the judgment that you would say on a road late at night with some drinks or a certain level of THC in your body. Um, that's something we have to address, and that's something we have to look at. And nationally, there's going to be that standard, and there's all those federal studies that really haven't happened yet because federally we haven't accepted it yet. We've delisted it as Schedule One, but we're not quite fully there yet. So those studies have to happen. So there's a lot ahead to consider for sure.
And I know I glossed over a little bit, but homelessness, substance
Yep.
abuse issues. I mean, there is a pretty complex relationship between legalization and homelessness. Just ask anyone, that lives in Denver, right?
Or
Yeah.
Oregon. Yeah.
Or Oregon.
Or
Yeah, a good
yeah.
friend of mine lives in Portland, and
Yep.
um, so while we were seeing chronic homelessness rise in some states, can you attribute that to marijuana legalization? Yeah, maybe in some areas. There's a lot more at play there. So, but we do know that increased substance abuse disorders are on the rise in states where legalization has occurred.
It
And
does. Yeah. And that's
and
something.
we're not talking about because we're not talking about the pot that was grown in the 80s and 90s, like maybe like when I was in high school is around like THC levels, what, like 0.3% or whatever,
No,
or
you're talking 20
3%.
plus percent now in good quality cannabis coming out of NorCal. And even
Yeah.
the cartel stuff, it's got poisons all over it, but it's potent as heck, man. Yeah. It's not the same weed of our generation as kids by any means, for sure.
And when that same course that I was at, there was a pediatrician from the state of Colorado that was in that class. One of his major concerns was the effects of THC and marijuana on the developing brain. There's
Yeah.
pretty good, and I don't know if I can't remember if you and Rogan talked about this or not, but I mean, I've heard Rogan say like he doesn't think anyone should smoke marijuana before the age of 25. Um, whether he still believes that or not, I don't know, but it made sense because particularly for males, right? The prefrontal cortex, there's
Yeah.
still
You're
a
still.
lot of neurological development that's
Yep.
occurring. And
Yep.
if you introduce intoxicants like this at the wrong time, just like same with alcohol and others, like it can be life altering, highly addicting, and it can literally change the trajectory of a child's life. So, making it more readily available is a byproduct of legalization. So, I mean, those are all things that have to be contended with.
They absolutely do because there is that effect. And then it gets into taking it seriously enough to say, yeah, maybe we're not going to regulate where somebody can, ingest THC recreationally until they're 25 or older. Because the studies show that, like you said, Patrick, you got formative development right there, and you're going to hinder that. And that can not only hinder development, but make that trajectory change. And I know some people, and I'm sure you do too, with some horror stories of some people that just couldn't handle their weed. And they
Yeah.
had great careers in law enforcement and they got depressed and they went into it and they got a bad strain or whatever, and were chronic, and it went into other drugs, and they're dead now.
Yeah.
And these were not your shady getting by type of people. These were people that had really legitimate careers and had to work for those careers, and you wouldn't recognize that person. And that has happened. And I can't say for sure what level cannabis was involved in that, or alcohol, or both, or maybe other white dope drugs, but it has that potential and it has to be looked at that way. And I think you're 100%. And that standard has to be looked at with regulation at the state or national level, without a doubt.
Yeah. And so just to close it out, then you think about the tax revenue implications. We go back to that almighty dollar, and when you're generating tax revenue from, like, everybody here in Indiana has already got their hand in this cookie jar.
Oh
Like, they
yeah.
can't
Oh,
wait.
yeah.
Like, they can't. Oh, well,
They're like
it's
licking
like
their chops, man.
yeah, we're
Yeah.
gonna solve all these problems, and I'm kind of like, well, I, I'm not as optimistic as you.
Yeah.
But this is the advice that I worked for years with our state chiefs association. I was our legislative chair for many, many years. So I worked at the state house. I've been involved in all these kinds of conversations, from legislation for bigger and heavier
Right.
trucks, you
Yeah.
name it. Like, you get involved in a lot of things, but the one thing that I really encourage our chiefs to consider when we talk about legalization is, like, we have to have a seat at the table in these conversations,
Yeah.
and we have to have a say. And the state they just need to know up front, if you're going to do this, then you got to take, and this is where maybe we need to do some, a little bit more fiscal due diligence. Is it 20%? Is it 30%? You just set that aside to say, look, this is
Yeah.
what we're going to use specific, like, this revenue is going to go directly back into law enforcement, because we're
Yep.
going to need to train, equip our police officers and our public safety employees.
For sure.
And then also there's going to have to be money available for education and other things, that all of the known
Yeah.
consequences from legalization, what they bring, to be able to manage it so it doesn't get freaking out of control.
Because it's headed that direction.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at. So I know it's uh it's not inevitable, but it's about as close to inevitable as I think is we're probably going to see. So
Yeah.
if in just to sum it up, like, in just maybe just a couple minutes, you mentioned Prop 64 about making sure that, for the last states, and whether we can do this at the federal level down the road or not, but, in the interim for Indiana, as we consider, what do you think are just a few of the biggest mistakes that California made that Indiana should definitely not make when they do consider legalization?
Biggest thing, first and foremost, to put in a nutshell, is don't take out the felony statute for illegal growing and distribution, whether it's indoor, outdoor, outdoor in the forest, black market, whatever. Um, Encourage your regulators to incentivize and reward people doing it by the numbers on every level: seed to sale, organic, organic testing. Um, try don't out budget them, don't break their bank, don't make them go through $80,000 of permits and different oversights to become a legitimate grower. That's what we've done in California, and it's run a lot of good growers out of the business. And the cartels have just taken over
And it
and
just pushes
fivefold
it right in. Yeah, it just
market. So
pushes it right
those
into the
those two
illegal
things,
growth.
without going any further, those two things, get the felony back into illegal growers, look at the environmental aspects, rope in other crimes if you need to outside of just cannabis. And then, like I said, just make it approachable for somebody getting into the business, doing it by the numbers. And when you inspect them, if they make mistakes, they have to handle it accordingly under the law, right?
Right.
Penalties, whether they're civil, if it's a misdemeanor, and if they're pushing and bringing in illegal stuff in their back door, and it's cartel generated or whatever, or they're being complicit in the illegal black market, and I'm going to say dominated by the cartels, that, that rings of the highest penalty to me. So that's how you have to look at it.
All right. Well, we covered a lot of ground
We did, brother.
in the
Yeah.
last hour and a half, and that was I just want to again, I just want to close like seriously, you got to like for anyone that has any type of interest in this, you have to listen to the audiobook or maybe listen and read along as you go because it really was that good. I really enjoyed it,
I am
and I
really, really
learned a lot.
honored. I'm honored you dove into it with all the good work you've done, and thanks a lot for promoting it. And can you pull it, just hold it up for a second
Yep.
more? It looks good against that green you got going back.
Doesn't it really? Like we
Yeah,
might
it
have
looks
to do
good.
like I'll get some higher quality pictures and send it to you, but
Yeah, they look
um
great. If you could
we
send me it. It's funny,
do a
like
little
your LED green tone is like the green tone of the print color that the publisher picked that I didn't even pick. I'm like, dude, how did you get that way? Yeah, we're fixated on green, the thin green line, green outdoors. So no, but all kidding aside, thank you so much for taking an interest in this. And I haven't really had a talk on a podcast or with a fellow LEO brother or sister that's focused so much on the ramifications of legalization, and you haven't had it yet. So this is a unique, interesting, and very fortunate time for us to discuss this. And it goes without saying, the PowerPoints and the experiences and all the things we've done right and wrong. If you guys need any of it out there, I speak and teach to LEO groups all over the country, and I'm glad to come out if you need that or would like that for any reason and give us a chance to work together. So I'll throw that out.
Yeah, I've already had some of those conversations, and I'll definitely be in touch with you in terms of getting that done,
Cool.
seeing what your availability is. Like again, tomorrow's kind of a big day.
Let's see what happens. And I'm
Yeah,
sure
in
you and
Indiana
I'll,
here, if the Republican governor wins, which he's favored to win,
yeah,
he says he's going to listen to law enforcement, and we're going to hold him to that because he already tried to screw us over once on qualified immunity, as Senator Braun. Um, but to his credit, I think he took a step back, and which you don't see a lot of times in politicians. Sometimes
yeah,
people just double down on,
right.
on bad policy positions. I just think maybe he didn't get the right information and didn't quite understand the ramifications of that. So I do give him a lot of credit for really rethinking that. If the Democrat candidate wins, I think this is going to be something that's going to be on the ballot as early as next year. I mean, it's going to move.
I
It'll
wouldn't
move
doubt it.
fast.
But
So,
I'll definitely let's stay in touch throughout tomorrow and after. And certainly on a lighter note, if we have any hunting success, I'd like to. I'll be sending you
oh
some
yes.
pictures.
Well,
I'm
I
getting
can't
back in the
wait.
deep rut after next week. I get back home and getting that deep timber wet and just praying for that big whitetail I've been seeing on camera. He's going to be hard, but we'll see it. I'll certainly share it with you if you. I'd like to see whatever you get, and I'm wishing you the best on your hunt.
I really appreciate that. It's been, we had like a really warm week last week.
Yeah.
Bizarre, like in the 80s. So it was kind of like, well, I'm actually I'll be back out tomorrow. So
All right, man. I'm crossing.
I figure there's probably no better place to be tomorrow than like out in the middle of the woods by myself with my bow. So that's where I'll be tomorrow. And for everyone that's listening, is there an easy way? Like someone wants more information from you, is there a best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way is just go to my website. It's www.johnnorris.com, JOHNNORES.com, and you can email me directly through my website, which is trailblazer413 at yahoo.com. And then on Instagram and Facebook, it's just at John Norris, JOHNNORES. There are some imposters, so both are verified accounts. Look for the blue check on IG or Facebook. We get a lot of imposters on that. And I'm on LinkedIn where you and I met.
Yep.
Ironically, I've been doing more on LinkedIn as of late. Haven't been on it long, but same thing, just John Norris, and you'll see the same profile picture. Hit me up there as well. If anybody wants personalized copies, the book is on Amazon, Audible, Kindle, print copies. I do sign copies for people that want them. We also have a whole signature line of knives that I'm part of, V knives, the Trailblazer signature, thin blue, thin green, thin red. We got the folding blade. I
Oh
never got
yeah, let me see.
never got to carry that has the built-in glass breaker and
Nice.
the seatbelt cutter harness right in here. D2 serrated or non-serrated, so it's my carry hunting knife as well. That's a thin red line variant. We got the OD green black handle for the tactical hunter types, and also thin blue and thin green and thin red to honor our firefighters, our police officers, military, border patrol, and firefighters. I have a line of fixed blades, and you can see all that on my website, or you can go to vknives.com, vnives.com, and look for the Trailblazer series, and they're all there.
V knives. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll send you a little something here shortly to take a look at.
Right on.
Love it. It's going to have some blue in it. I promise you
Yeah.
that.
Well, that's my benchmark. So I'm definitely gonna have to look now. I'm very intrigued, and I like to support our brothers and sisters out there in law enforcement when they have these endeavors. So, John, thank you very much. I really do appreciate all your time. I know your time is valuable, and I really do think that your insights, your experience, they're going to go a long way in helping us make better decisions. I'm hoping, I'm optimistic. For as much as my doses of pessimistic, I'm still a glass half full kind of person. So,
I'm with you, man, and it's an honor to get to talk to you today. And thanks a lot for having me on. And we'll keep in
awesome.
touch.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, everybody. You heard it. Get the book, listen to the Audible, and until the next time, we'll be 1042.